Bohemia, 1798. Inside the cold, echoing castle of ducks, an old man sits alone. His name is Giacomo Casanova, but he is a ghost of his former self, mocked by the servants, and living on the charity of a nobleman. He is seen as a failed, penniless relic. But Casanova is engaged in one final, magnificent act of rebellion. By candlelight, he is writing. He is not penning letters begging for money, but building a time machine made of ink and memory. He is writing his memoirs, the story of my life. He is not just recording events. He is conjuring a ghost, ensuring the world will remember him not as this forgotten old man, but as the legendary Chevalier de Saint-Galt, lover, adventurer, and philosopher. This is the story of that double life, the public legend of the irresistible seducer, and the private, desperate struggle of a man seeking a place in a world that had no room for him. Giacomo Casanova was born in 1725 in Venice, a city where identities were as fluid as its canals. The son of actors, he learned early that life was a performance. A bright but sickly child, he was taken to a witch who prescribed strange rituals. Instead of being frightened, young Giacomo was fascinated. It was his first lesson in the power of mystery and illusion. His intellect was his ticket out of obscurity. Sent to school in Padua, he proved a brilliant scholar, graduating with a law degree at 17. But the law was too rigid for his restless spirit. He returned to Venice and drifted, trying and failing at the priesthood, a role for which he was profoundly unsuited. He even played the violin in a theater orchestra, a lowly position for a man of his ambitions. Watching the glittering nobility from the shadows and yearning to join them, his big break came when he saved the life of the wealthy Senator Bragadin. The senator, convinced Casanova was his good luck charm, adopted him as a protege, giving him money, an apartment, and an entry into high society. Casanova seized the opportunity. He learned to fence, dress exquisitely, and converse with wit. He invented a title for himself, the Chevalier de Saint-Galt. The mask of the gentleman was now firmly in place, but in Venice, a republic of spies, dancing too close to the flame was dangerous. Casanova's dabbling in magic and his free-thinking ideas attracted the attention of the dreaded Council of Ten in 1755. At the peak of his Venetian glory, he was arrested without trial and thrown into I Piombi, the Leads, the terrible prisons under the palace's lead roof. For a man who lived for freedom, conversation, and light, it was a living death. Despair threatened to consume him, but his brilliant mind turned to one purpose: escape. His first attempt, gouging a hole in the floor a stolen iron bar, failed, moved to a worse cell. He only grew more determined. With a makeshift spike sharpened on marble, he spent months boring a hole through the ceiling to a neighboring cell, hiding the debris in his mattress. On a moonlit night in October 1756, he and his fellow conspirator, the renegade priest Balbi, hauled themselves up, broke onto the leaden roof, and, using a rope of shredded sheets, climbed down into the heart of the Doge's palace itself. They simply walked out the front door as it opened for the day. The escape from I Piombi became the cornerstone of his legend. It was more than a physical feat. It was a philosophical statement. He had asserted his will against the crushing power of the state. But he was now an exile, and the stage of Europe awaited. The legend of Casanova is, of course, the legend of the lover, but to see him as a mere seducer is to miss the point. He was not classically handsome. His power lay in his conversation, his vitality, and his profound attentiveness. In an age where women were often treated as property, Casanova offered them escape, intellectual companionship, and the feeling of being truly seen and desired. His affair with Henriette, a noblewoman in disguise, was a perfect example. For weeks, they lived an idyll of music, poetry, and conversation. When she left, she etched on a window, "You will forget Henriette." He never did. For him, these were not conquests, but shared episodes of perfect happiness. He was an artist of intimacy, and each new love was a new country to be explored. But no country could hold him forever. To fund his life as a gentleman, Casanova relied on gambling, a skill as unreliable as a roll of the dice. His life was a cycle of spectacular wins and catastrophic losses, which forced him into other roles. He became a spy carrying messages across Europe, a profession perfect for a man of his wits and charm. His most audacious scheme was his exploitation of Madame Durfay, an eccentric, wealthy Parisian aristocrat obsessed with the occult. She believed Casanova, as her personal magus, could reincarnate her as a young boy. For years, he performed expensive, elaborate rituals, convincing her to hand over her fortune. It was a cruel deception, yet Casanova saw himself as providing a service, giving her hope and a grand narrative for her life. The scheme, like all his others, eventually collapsed, and he was forced to flee Paris. This pattern repeated itself across the continent, in London, Warsaw, and Vienna. He was a connoisseur of chance, believing fortune favored the bold. But with each narrow escape and scandal, the walls of respectable society closed in around him. Beneath the layers of performance was the identity Casanova prized most. The intellectual. In the salons of Paris, he debated with Voltaire. He corresponded with Frederick the Great and wrote volumes of history and mathematics. He was a true man of the Enlightenment, a skeptic and a materialist who believed in reason and the pursuit of intelligent pleasure. The great irony of his life was that the world rejected the thinker and embraced the lover. His magnum opus, a utopian novel called Ikesamorin, was a bizarre failure. The world did not want Casanova the philosopher. It wanted the legend he had created. He was an actor typecast in a role he had come to resent, but without which he was nothing. After 18 years of exile, Venice pardoned him. In 1774, he returned, a middle-aged man. He tried to reclaim his old life, but the magic was gone. He even became a spy for the very Inquisition that had imprisoned him. He found genuine love with a young seamstress, Francesca Buschini. A simple, heartfelt relationship unlike any of his previous affairs. But he was poor, and his schemes failed. Venice had changed, or he had. He was an anachronism, a public literary feud with a powerful nobleman, Carlo Grimani, was the final straw. In 1782, at age 57, he was forced into exile once more. Heartbroken at leaving Francesca and his home behind, his final refuge was the Castle of Ducks in Bohemia, where he worked as a librarian for Count Waldstein. It was a humiliating post. The German nobles despised the talkative, aging Italian. He was a caged lion, prone to rages, boring guests with stories of his glorious past. They saw a pathetic old man. They did not see the artist at work. Alone in the vast library, he began his memoirs. This was not an act of nostalgia, but of alchemy. He was transforming the bitter failure of his present into the golden legend of his past. He was not merely remembering, he was resurrecting. On the page, he was no longer the mocked librarian, but the brilliant Casanova, the friend of kings, the lover of princesses, the man who cheated death. He wrote with frantic urgency, fighting against oblivion. The scratch of his quill was the sound of a man building his own pyramid, a monument to ensure he would never be erased. Casanova died at Dux in 1798, largely forgotten, but the ghost he created in that library would not rest. When his memoirs were finally published in full, the world discovered the complex man behind the myth. The double life of Casanova was the chasm between the man and the legend. The man was Giacomo Casanova, a failure, an outsider who died lonely. The myth was the Chevalier de Saint-Gault, the eternal lover, the daring adventurer. In the end, Casanova won. He understood that a life is not just what is lived, but what is remembered. By writing his story, he seized control of his narrative. He was the greatest lover not because he seduced countless women, but because he seduced history itself. He convinced us to remember him exactly as he wished. A man who lived without apology, worshipped freedom, and carved his name into eternity with a pen. He is no longer the shadow in the library. He is Casanova, forever young, forever escaping, forever in love. The performance, at last, is eternal.